Hello, everyone. Welcome to this online Black History Month event. My name is Yusef Bakkali, and I work at DMU at the Stephen Lawrence Research Centre as a Legacy and Action Fellow. And I'm actually really privileged today to introduce Karl Lokko, who's our special guest speaker. Karl's going to come and talk to us about his background coming from sort of a gang activist state in South London, and how he sort of changed his life around, and how now his work is really the important work he's doing in relation to social justice and activism. So I don't want to say too much. I actually come from the same neighborhood that Karl comes from, and I live probably about a 5-minute walk away. And that time in the early 2000s that we're talking about, when we were sort of coming of age and growing up, I remember we used to call that estate Baghdad. So this is at the time, just recently, like the war in Iraq, and we were getting all those images beamed back to us. So like, I want to give you a kind of feel or idea of the kind of background Karl's coming from. And that was sort of like, we sort of understood that area as being a bit of like a war zone, or a bit of like a, I think Karl will probably say it better than me. But I just want to give you like that sense of where he was coming from, and that we kind of have that shared experience. So I'm really, really, really excited to hear Karl talk, and I don't want to take up any more time in it. So Karl, thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusef. Yeah, so in regards to growing up in Brixton, South London, Mitesfield Estate, it wasn't all kind of like bullet cases and actual police cases and all the rest of it. I actually had quite an idyllic upbringing, so I'm going to bring you back to the very beginning. Came from a council estate called Cowley Estate initially, actually. Both mum and dad present, very loving. My house was so warm, that all I remember and still remember, even if I go to visit my parents today, is this warmth. For example, on a Saturday morning, it was our ritual that at 8 a.m. we will rise, and by about 8:15, Cotton Eye Joe is pumping through the stereos, and we're all dancing like we're in a Western. And I mean, it was a great time, I actually enjoyed school, and home was a little bit like school also, because my mother was a teacher in Ghana. Her mother was a teacher before her. And academics was exalted and esteemed and enthroned in my household. So, I mean, I couldn't get any of that action then, but I definitely had all the encyclopedias. So I made good work with those. And as I said, school was a little bit easy for me, not in a way, it was just easy, because our schooling system, and then that's another conversation, is one that if they give you information and you can give it back to them, everyone claps, and I was very good at regurgitation. So they will tell me something, and then 3 months down the line, I'll tell them, and then they give me green ticks. So I mean, I like that. It was good for my self-esteem. And it actually really kind of got an accelerant when my school, which actually happened to be funded by, it had a lot of money basically. And even though it was a state school, we had like a botanical garden, we had 3G pitch, we had swimming pool, and they ended up using some funds to do a comb through the school to see if they could find any kind of like geniuses. And I was one of 3 that was actually found in this combing, and I did my year 9 SATs in year 6, and I ended up getting level 6 in year 6. And if you can remember that grading system, which most of you probably won't, but I mean, that was quite a big song and dance, so I was kind of told by my parents, told by the teachers, you can be and do anything you want to do, and I believed them, and I wanted to be, at first, I would say from about 8 to about 9.5, I wanted to be a veterinary surgeon. Then from about, I would say 10, my father was obsessed with like crime detective shows and all the rest of it. So I actually wanted to be a forensic pathologist. That was at 10. Then when I was about 11, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I would say about 11.5, 12, I wanted to be a pilot. And then when I was about 12.75, I wanted to be a gang member. And that was the corrosion you know. And it was actually gradual. You know, the seeds were sown in unique ways, as Yusuf alluded to. Where we grew up was like, I mean, gangsterism and certain happenings is, you know, it's not exclusive to any like particular area, even though it's higher in certain areas. At that time in London, talking about like the early kind of, yeah, I'll say like maybe, I'll say for the last like 15 years ago, it was rife, you know. So, for example, to paint a picture, I would maybe go to the corner shop for my mother to buy tomato puree, you know. And any West Africans on the live probably know exactly what that tomato puree is for, you know, for the exalted jollof rice. And I'll be on my way quite happily, and I definitely will be approached and asked to get off my bike and to give them my bike. That was just normal, you know. So a lot of the time I didn't want to ride the bike that my parents bought me, you know. Actually, for years later, for years, I'd say when I was about maybe 12, I was someone tried to rob me. They punched me in my face because I wouldn't give them the bike. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just knew my parents weren't going to spunk out and buy me another bike. It was £100 purchase. It just weren't going to happen again, you know. So I mean, just out of necessity, like I had to muster some courage and really beg them not to take the bike. He ended up punching me, and every day I got on that bike after that, I could taste blood. Like, even though my mouth lip had kind of healed and all the rest of it. And you don't want to tell your parents because then they're going to tell you that you have to stay in. But I mean, that's the real kind of lower doubt. You know, it started getting to a point where some of the young men in the area that were even my age, you know, might come to my house as guests, you know, and kind of posing as friends, but they come there with ulterior motives and end up taking like PlayStation games and things like that. And at one point, they actually took my PlayStation console, which is definitely not a great start to the week or that month. My mother's car was being broken into regularly. At one time, my father actually, caught them in the middle of the act, went outside to try and obviously scare them off and tell them to stop that. And I was the scared one, you know, so I was petrified, frightened, you know, just huge amounts of anxiety. My brother was being mugged repeatedly, you know, so he was 4 years older than me, and it just kind of felt like that was my like destiny, you know. So I'm like, oh, 4 years from now, like I'm gonna be getting mugged repeatedly also, you know. Also, another thing was that sometimes like young men in the area might attack me, even though you can't see it, I'm quite a big lad. And I was a big lad. I was always at the back of the classroom for school. However, I was very soft. You know, I was definitely, to hit someone in the face was unimaginable. You know, so even when I was getting hit in the face, I just couldn't return the favor. And I would go to tell my father, because my father was who would, in my mind's eye, solve those sort of problems. You know. And my father is like, my mother and father, they're just awesome people, upstanding citizens. I always say the only thing they did illegally was get into the country, but when they got here, clean as a whistle. Wouldn't even use profanity, they still don't, you know. But yeah, I told this, my dutiful father, he asked me where the young man lives, went to go speak to their parents. I thought it was kind of resolved. And then when I was leaving, the young man that attacked me and his older brother looked at me through a little kind of angle where our parents couldn't see and said, "Watch," you know. And that watch echoed, and I knew they were going to see me eventually, and I was going to have to, you know, do whatever needs to be done. So I was like, all right, cool, my father's way don't work, you know, so we're going to abandon that. And so I started basically, the real nail in the coffin actually was, I was talking about the PlayStation games, and it even gets a bit heavy when I mentioned this one because it's just such a sad story. Young men was coming to my house taking PlayStation games. They ended up eventually, a different group actually took the actual console, and there was a young man in my area who was actually, a similar thing was happening to him, and his dutiful father caught wind of it and actually went outside to tell them that, listen, I work hard to be able to afford these games for my son. He lets you in the house to play with. I don't think it's correct that, you know, and I mean, things kind of escalated, and my friend's dad was actually stabbed in the heart and died, you know, and I just could see that that could have very easily have been my own father, you know. So my now 12-and-a-half-year-old brain is getting to ticking, and I'm like, there is no way. Yeah, just not on my watch, basically. If you can't beat them, you join them. And I feel as if I've always kind of had a sense of responsibility when it comes to especially my family, because for so many years, like my parents, they believed in meritocracy, you know. So because all the teachers were kind of making a song and dance, they kind of thought, wow, they've got a lawyer on their hands or a doctor on their hands or some sort of messiah savior, you know. So I feel like as if that almost translated, and I felt like I needed to save my household essentially. So yeah, I mean, if you can't beat them, you join them. But I had no clout to even join an existing gang because I was just that kind of soft and not in the know and not in the mix. You know, I was the furthest thing from it. My parents definitely were caught wind of what was happening in the area, and best to keep me indoors and to escort me to the local park. You know, they were very hands-on. So whenever you hear certain stories and like, oh yeah, it's the parents, I mean, that's very narrow. But I mean, yeah, I had no clout to join an existing gang in the area. So I ended up making my own gang. And I just made a band of young men that was just as scared as me, just as intimidated, knew what it was to experience those surges of anxiety going to and fro, this corner shop to home, I don't know, on the bus to commute to school. I mean, everyone that was scared like that, I mean, I kind of brought them in and said, we can be scared together. And being scared together was better than being scared on our own. So it felt like it worked, you know. So I'm like, living heck, there's something here. And I kept on it. And then I actually got a bit more ambitious. I was like, you know what? Maybe I can actually turn this into something. So I ended up pitching this idea of this gang to some of the young men in my area that was a part of an existing, maybe a younger faction of another group. And I'm like, why just be youngers when you could have your own and we can have our own youngers? So I kind of appealed to their own sense of wanting to take agency and their ambition. And yeah, I mean, they bit. So I just kind of had to just, I'm like, okay, now we're here. I just had to kind of just react to it and kind of fake it to make it. And I feel the best way to describe it is because I rebelled against everything I had kind of known, you know, it wasn't natural for me to take on that role. So what I did was every day, for survival essentially, you know, I would leave my house with a mask. And when I would come home, I'll take it off because it serves no purpose on in the house, you know. I'm not in any kind of danger there in that way. And then when I'm going out again, I'll put it back on, coming home, take it off, going out, put it back on, going home, take it off. And eventually, like, I went out with it, came home, and I couldn't even take it off. It was like the Jim Carrey film, you know, just, it was a stunt that the mask was actually me, you know. And during that period, as you can imagine, like, a lot was happening. My best friend was murdered by my side a day before our GCSE exams, of which, as you can imagine, would never leave me. It informs me essentially. Yeah, another friend of mine was murdered 2 years after that. In a shootout, he was shot twice in the head. And I mean, I've had countless, it's so weird because the splitting effect on the street is outrageous. I mean, in our world, it's outrageous actually. Whether it be Catholic and Protestant divides in Ireland, or I don't know, like, I mean, we create borders that don't really exist, that don't need to exist. But I mean, gangsterism really does that also. So I talk about friends that was dying, but I had young men that went to my school that was kind of my friend, but then They now are from that area, so I kind of discontinued that friendship, which is not actually true. That's not how the heart works, but yeah, that was our reality. So even though I name about maybe 4 or 5 friends that have lost their lives due to the streets that I would call my kind of circle, my group, it's a lot more than that. I should have definitely gone to at least 15 to 20 funerals, and then that's just one side of it, because then you lose some that have actually lost their life because they've been murdered. And then I've lost friends that have actually been on the fence, and they're the ones that had did the murdering. One of my friends is actually incarcerated to the highest any young person in this country has ever been sentenced to, and that is 45 years in prison. And as you can kind of color in yourself, it was an absolute kind of mess, yeah. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. It definitely gets a bit sunnier. I was very fortunate. My rehabilitation came in the form of a woman called Pastor Mimi, and her son was my right-hand man in the gang that we were in. And ultimately, she wanted to save her son's life. She knew what he was involved in, and she had tried to reach him like any dutiful mother would, But again, it was something that was very alien to her. She had no previous kind of involvement with that sort of culture. It wasn't something that she was privy to. So all of her attempts would fall short. So she kind of, instinctually and, by the grace of God, kind of had this thought that if she can't reach him directly, she could reach his friends, and then maybe it could cross-pollinate, And it did. She reached me, and I was able to cross-pollinate to him, and vice versa. And I say that gave the desire to want to change. Desire and the actual kind of reformation in its totality is, there's a huge kind of that's a huge commute. And what ended up happening was her home became an informal therapeutic community gang rehabilitation center. She didn't call it that. It was very organic. But now, a few years later, when I actually kind of unpacked it and really that's the best definition to give it. She was the Mother Teresa of South London, and still is the Mother Teresa of South London. Opened her home in a way that I literally lived there. There was a few of us, including her 3 sons. Her living room weren't actually her living room. It had to be translated into some kind of makeshift ping pong and snooker venue. It was a tough gig. I was shot at outside her house. Bullet went through her front door while she was actually in the kitchen. So that could have gone a very different way. The police would kind of be kicking down her door because she's dealing with what they would deem as high alert individuals, which was myself and some of my peers. So it was definitely a journey, but her commitment and her approach was what gave her the day, essentially. She never demonized us. She never even demonized any gang member. She never demonized any person. She's like, that's not who you are. That's what you're caught in. She differentiated it in a way that was, I hadn't seen it to that extent before, So it was, I don't know what it did for me. It kind of let me know that that's not who I am, and because it's not who I am, I can become something else, or I can be something else, or I already am something else, So her being a pastor, her whole kind of MO was taken from the teachings of Christ, which was all about love, essentially, and she never saved us with religion. Religion really couldn't have saved us, but she did show us, so much love, and showed us the power of love and the necessity for love, And when I eventually saw that through our conversations, because again, she's also a qualified counselor, there was a lot of talking, I was able to see that the young men from across the road, who was in my similar socioeconomic situations, similar kind of hardships, and some of them that actually went to my same primary school, are definitely not my enemy. it's the ideology that's riding us both and causing us to be at loggerheads, you know. So when I realized that essentially that they are not my enemy, the ideology is, I turned what would be our metaphorical guns at the real enemy, you know. And then kind of went against that, kept on pushing back at that. She, again, I said there was a huge focus on love, and still is a huge focus on love. I believe that love is all in all and deserves to be worshipped, you know. And her approach was that love is not a gooey feeling, but love is a choice. And I had never really kind of seen that you can make the decision to love and decide to love anyone at any time. So I remember, like, I remember she used to, her kind of basis and her kind of go-to and the core of her philosophy was derived from the Bible. And she would kind of float ideas by me that if you make peace, you can make peace, basically about brokering peace, you know? And I was just like, I don't think they know what sort of issues is ensuing us in this community. It's a lot more than kind of sending them cards and chocolate and saying that, yeah, sorry, like, you know, there's certain things that it should be, or you would think that sorry actually can't remedy, you know. So I actually thought, you know what, and this is gonna actually, I won't say that. Yeah, but I kind of thought, I've come from an arena, a world, a field where you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is and you have to test it, you have to see its validity, you know. So I wasn't willing to hinge my life upon a new philosophy that for me wasn't actually like credible. So I was like, there's a risk that comes with testing out anything, whether that be testing out rockets and going into space, or but to advance, no risk, no reward. So I kind of thought, you know what, I'm gonna take one for the team being I also, you know, and I'm gonna go and see whether this works. And I literally walked into enemy territory, and I mean like enemy territory, and just kind of just walked over to them. They did the normal kind of rubbing hands, rubbing their eyes, like in disbelief, like, can this be Christmas? You know, it is April, like it has come early. And essentially like started gearing up to make sure I needed to either see a doctor or no one see me again. And I kind of came with my hands in certain ways so they know, and it is what it is. And I approached them and I was just like, you know what, I am sorry and I love you, you know. And they looked at me and they barked at me. I mean, barked. They howled and told me to F off and very other colorful language, and told me to kind of leave the area. And I turned around and I left, and I remember leaving with my head hung low, thinking, blimmin' heck, like that wasn't successful. Like I kind of thought that we'd be going for a drink after that, you know. Like actually I'm lying, because it was very kind of like Islamic in the orientation, so it wouldn't have been a drink we had gone for, but you kind of get what I'm saying. I thought that maybe yeah, we'll be friends, and that weren't the case. So as I'm walking off, kind of, yeah, heartbroken essentially and disappointed that no, this don't work. It then dawned on me that I'm walking off. I'm like, wait a second. I just walked into enemy territory unarmed, you know, and here I am again, like, okay. So I was like, blimmin' heck, this does work, you know, we're onto something. So I went back again the next day, so the exact same thing. They told me with just the same intensity to F off, you know. Then I came back again the next day and I said, I love you, I'm sorry, and we've been lied to. And they're like, you're all right, Locks. That's what they used to call me back then. They're like, you're all right, Locks. Is everything okay? Like alluding to maybe insanity, which wasn't actually a far cry, because a lot of people in the situation that we're in, a few would actually kind of phase in and out of sanity, you know. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm all right. Then they're like, all right, F off. And then I'll F off again. I'll come back the next day and say, listen, I love you. I'm sorry we've been lied to. They're like, Locks, who's lied to us? And I'm like, now they've opened the door of utterance, you know. So I'm like, listen, the ideology, this idea that you must come kill me, I must come. And I mean, it doesn't make no sense, you know, like you went to my primary school, like that's what we doing, you know. And ultimately, if I was born right there in that estate there, I would be your friend and been trying to, you know, it's just a bit daft, you know, it just seems like we've been deceived. And they'll be like, yeah, I kind of hear that. And then eventually actually became, I'll say, quote unquote, friends, you know, and they would give me the platform, sorry, to actually speak to the younger men in their area, you know, and these are what from the outside people would deem these as kind of irredeemable, kind of like scum of the universe, X, Y, and Z, whatever colorful language someone wants to use, feral or I don't know, you can but these young men would mind it, maybe ill-gotten gains, but allow me to stand on the roof of their Mercedes C-Class and subpoena the attention of all the young men in the area and say, listen, you got to listen to Locks, he's got something to say to you. And I'll be stood on the roof of their car just talking to them and telling them that, listen, we've been lied to, it's not worth dying out here for any of this. And I realized that talking them into a new way of life wasn't the best way of doing it. So I would have to show them that it was possible. So I knew it was possible to think, feel, and be different, but I didn't know whether we could be in a different situation because we were coming from an area where it's the lowest kind of socioeconomic situation there. You know, we've got various barriers to employment, and you know, so many things are kind of stacked against us. So I just kind of got obsessed with how much agency do I actually have? How can I cultivate essentially a new life? Like, is social mobility something that that can happen, you know? So I started to read everything, you know. Literally, I read everything. I read a book a week for about 2 to 3 years. You know, I learned 10 new words a day to change my lingual syntax. I mean, you name it. I listened to audios and podcasts. I listened to like 2, 3 TED Talks a day. I just became an autodidact. You know, I was just self-taught and I just would soak in everything and I would question everything. And the reason why I question everything is because I realized that if I wanted answers, I must want questions, because questions are answers masters, you know. And essentially, I just asked myself a question like, can someone be paid X by doing Y? All right, so can someone have Y without being born with Z? You know, and I'll try and see whether I can see examples of where that has existed, where that has happened. A lot of autobiographies, I'd kind of read it, soak it in. And then I just started to I was heavy on affirmations. I had an affirmation that I said on the hour, every day. You know, so I mean, the moment, whereas another kind of cuckoo clock, when it hits certain times will cuckoo, I would literally say my affirmation, you know. And eventually I began to feel like it was all possible, like I had it already, and it was just inevitably going to happen. And I mean, my life weren't saying amen to it, you know. There was no agreement in what was surrounding me. Still obscurity, still kind of certain happenings, still trying to navigate very murky waters. And I actually had a cleaning job at the time that I had inherited from my mother. It was a £10 an hour cleaning job that she never let go, even with her nursing work. She always kept that job. And when I told her, obviously I ain't getting I'm not essentially selling drugs or robbing drug dealers, so I don't have no income. She gave me this cleaning job, and I took it because it was on a Monday and a Thursday night, and it was like for 3 hours, and each day they paid me something like £108 every 2 weeks. So it's something like £216 a month, and I was still living at Pastor Mimi's house, so it was okay, you know. So I did that, but while I was doing that, I started writing plans, started kind of like, I would speak to the bowl. It would be like the toilet bowl would be, I did my best affirmations while watching the toilet bowl. I can't be honest, because I think it's just the pain. I just converted it into fuel, and I would literally use the toilet bowl as like some microphone of sorts that the piping is sending it to definitely everywhere I need to be and going to be, you know. And I kind of started saying how much I'll be earning and all the rest of it. I developed it, I designed it, and I went for it, and I just took steps every single day. You know, I learned some techniques like swallowing the frog, kind of like just different things. I ended up realizing that on a street level, this is where the kind of real this was what the real catalyst for me was, that I realized that even though it was unconventional, even though it was informal, I had actually acquired huge skills, you know. For example, when I was 13, I had a group of maybe 50 young men about my age that I essentially was the leader in that, you know. So I was able to get them to commit to supporting whatever our agenda was, and I wasn't even paying them, or, you know. And then there are those that maybe are at the helm of a company and paying and still can't foster that level of commitment, you know. So I started to really unpack and unravel, and I realized, it dawned on me that Blimey Neck got a lot of skills, you know. And I just said, all right, cool, I'm just going to superimpose it into the mainstream. And one of my kind of USPs about me on the street level was my relational power. I had a lot of relationships, and as a result, I saw that I never actually knew what a drought was. And a drought was maybe when you can't get a hold of a certain thing. You know, I didn't have droughts because I had kind of like contacts and relationships, meaningful ones, quite, because basically everywhere in that kind of world, or in that sphere. So I'm like, all right, cool. If I do the same thing here, then maybe I won't know a drought too. So I focused on the relational power. I did about 20, 30, sometimes 40 one-on-one meetings a week. At times I had to walk to those meetings because I couldn't afford the, I think it was back then, it was £20.80 or something for zones 1 and 2 travel card. And that was out of my budget. So, literally I had one kind of like blazer that I was rocking the hell out of that one. Going to all these different meetings. Sometimes I'll be stood up, sometimes like, I mean, I just going for it, you know. I just took the same courage, because on the street level, again, talking about translatable skills, I understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but a substance you could tug on to overcome fear, you know. So I was definitely very scared entering something that was so alien to me, you know. But I mean, I kept it going, and eventually one person introduced me to one person, and then I thought, you know what, I want to create the country's first therapeutic community gang rehabilitation center. I want to be able to scale the work that Pastor Mimi had done with us. I wanted to make it accessible to more, because now I know there is actual possibility of a turnaround. You know, those that were seemingly liabilities can actually become assets to their community. So I was fixated on creating the space. So I wrote the program, the 13-month program, and then I basically made up my first email address. And from this first email address, I think it was a Gmail one. From the first email address, no, it wasn't Gmail. I think it was live. I made a list, sorry, of like a dream team, people that if I had got contact with could come on board and help to kind of like help incubate this idea, you know, so that we could change ultimately what was going on in London. And once I kind of concocted this kind of dream team, which was of the likes of like Ian Duncan Smith, head of the Rothschild Bank UK Europe, Mark Whelan, who was one of the biggest PR men in the country at that time, British pop star Plan B. I mean, it was a long list, some very decorated police officers and some psychologists, Dr. Charlie Alcock, and it was a brilliant list, the one that you can't usually get to their PAs, and there's about 12 of them. And then I shot my shot, man. I mean, literally, I wrote a tailored email to each of them, and basically out of the 12, 10 got back to me, and the 10 that got back to me, I went with them to dinner. And then from there, they all became kind of my contacts, and they contributed, and they definitely saw the vision. And yeah, essentially it just avalanched from there. So I started, that was my first kind of my network, you know, started from the likes of like Ian Duncan Smiths and head Rothschild Bank, blah, 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 and X, Y, and Z. And all it's done is avalanche since then, to a point where today, most of the royal family is my friends, and Richard Branson's grandkids are my godchildren, and like I mean, like I just got a network, you know. So for me, the network is to be able to spread a message ultimately, and my message is one on reformation and the need for it, and that also a lot of the issues we see with whatever kind of degenerate kind of behavior, whether I mean even on the level, some level homelessness and all of these different kind of things that we see as a thorn in the side of our society, is ultimately created by the fragments and the fragmentations of our society. It's a byproduct, you know. That feeling of exclusion creates these things, whether that be exclusive or excluded. They all make gangs, whether it be Bullingdon Boys Club or whether it be a London street gang in the corner of Brixton. Exclusion does that. It causes people to band together in a way that is separate from what the rest is doing. So my whole thing's about inclusion. You know, my message is about inclusion and yeah, forgiveness and hope essentially. So yeah, that's me. I think Yusuf.
Yeah. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm sure like I'll give you a little round of applause, but I'm sure people at home are feeling the same way. That was definitely very inspirational and moving, man, for real. Because obviously I kind of feel some of the stuff you're talking about that early time when it's your.
Is it on my end or?
You see me okay, yeah?
One second, let me see what.
Okay. So yeah, thank you. And like one of the things I was gonna say was, you know, I remember that time, sort of early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, trying to traverse Brixton, in it, trying to traverse that neighborhood, and how dangerous it was, and how, you know, that could turn people left or right because people responding to that kind of pressure, they could go left or they could go right, they could go this way or that way. You get me? A lot of people, they dropped out, but some people decided they wanted to stand their ground, innit? And that was kind of, I remember that time very, very much so. But kind of, and this kind of relates to the first question I got. Firstly, those people on the stream, there's a comment section on the right hand side, and feel free to put some questions in the comments section. And as they come through, I'll try to relay those to Karl. But there's one question I wanted to ask you in it, and it kind of relates now to the last bit of your talk, especially because we were talking before about kind of, because obviously this is like a story of like extreme social mobility, you know, very, very fast as well. Very, very rapid. You're still a young man, you get me? And what was that like in entering into those spaces with the Rothschilds and the heads of the Rothschilds bank, I'm not saying it's the Rothschilds family, but and Branson and all of these people as like a young black man from Britain? I know you've done a lot of self-work and all this kind of stuff, but do you feel there were specific barriers in that journey that were created by essentially being a young black man?
I mean, absolutely. It is, and it was one that you couldn't really vocalize because what has happened is we've kind of been eclipsed in some ways by the kind of explicit issue cross-Atlantic in the US. So it's like, oh no, the UK is not doing that, you know, so it's not doing it, but that's not really true. You know, it's more implicit and very institutional and very, very aggressive, very hostile, actually. You know, I definitely know that I was the only one in those rooms. You know, like I just had to become really good at being the only one. And that wasn't the biggest pain. It's more that for some, there isn't even a toleration. And in my view, it should go beyond just tolerating the other to celebrating the other. And there definitely wasn't any celebration of other, you know. So I actually got a huge identity crisis, actually, if I'm being honest. And we're speaking candidly, because I had to assimilate, you know. I had to learn to use, I can use all my forks at Lord's cricket ground, like, you know, I know what to wear, I know what songs they might have listened to. I had to read all of their books. You know, I know what literature they've read. I've read it too. You know, I had to know what I've become privy to certain things like mountain climbing and different things like that, you know, which was, I mean, worlds away from my world, you know. But I always say currently I am, maybe you could say, bilingual, you know, but I only speak English, you know. But the pain was that I learned their language, but no one really learned mine. And obviously I'm not talking about the tourism element. That's not actually a part of the culture, or, you know, like the real kind of essence of what my identity was. But I basically couldn't bring my full self to work. Yeah.
Do you think that affected the way you related to the young men? Because obviously I'm from the neighborhood, and I know you still have relationships with a lot of these young men that you grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you feel like entering into those spaces affected those relationships, or how do you manage that transition?
Yeah, it was, do you know what? It was, I was just basically living a double life, essentially, you know. So everyone knew I had denounced gangsterism and that I stood for peace, you know. They knew that that was set, you know. But then this next part of the evolution of basically kind of like fraternizing with Uptown, you know,
Yeah.
I would go Uptown and then do Uptown stuff, come downtown, do downtown stuff, but then never let Uptown and downtown meet. Like I just kept it totally separate, you know, and I did that for long. I mean, you go over there, they kiss twice. You come over here, you kiss once. You go over here, there's no money, you don't know what to do. You go over here, there's so much money, you don't know what to do with it. You know, it can get quiet, like, you know. So to reconcile that was more internal. But in terms of the evil world, like, everyone kind of accepted me for who I was, for who I showed them anyway, you know. So yeah.
No, that's interesting. It reminds me a lot. There's a black psychiatrist. He was from Martinique, called Frantz Fanon, and he wrote a book called Black Skins, White Masks.
Okay.
And he talked a lot about kind of the transition of, like, particularly like colonial elites in relation to like their relationship to whiteness. And it's like a lot of what you're talking about. Even use the expression mask, which I found interesting. I know you use that more in the hood context actually, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Use the mask there and not in it when we were talking about fraternizing with Uptown in it, which is I thought interesting. But there's something that I thought was really interesting. But I've got a question. I've got some audience questions here for you now on it. So
Sweet.
Safra has asked, what turned your mind around, since a lot of youngers are currently running away from their thoughts and desires? So I suppose this is like, what was it that changed your mind specifically? And maybe I suppose, how is that different to what a lot of the why do you think a lot of young people perhaps aren't able to make the same transitions as yourself, maybe?
You know what? When it's kind of like the question, like, what changed it? It's like maybe it was a singular thing. You know, there was no Big Bang for me. You know, Big Bang doesn't exist. You know, I never had that one moment where it was just an epiphany and then that was it. I was kind of on a truck in a different direction. It was more cluster of things, you know, a lot of small bangs that began to kind of sow seeds of, I mean, it began to make me question things quite healthily. You know, indoctrination, like, almost comes with just no questions. Like, you're not asking the right questions, no one's asking any questions. And a big part of my reformation was just asking questions, you know, inquiring, asking myself questions, asking others questions, and just scrutinizing and playing advocate, you know. So I feel like I was very fortunate to have that environment created in Pastor Mimi's home, you know, that then got me thinking and scrutinizing certain things that had transpired. And I was able to connect the dots in a certain way where I'm like, you know what, this actually isn't winning, you know, because a lot of people, no one runs a race to lose, you know. People don't set out to, I am setting out to have a bad life, you know. It just, what rules us all is our definitions. So what someone defines as good. So I realized that coming from where I was coming from, it was my definitions that had been changed. And that was obviously because of the environment. We know there's a saying that you are a product of your environment, you know. So essentially it was when I was able to scrutinize things that came through a cluster of things happening. And that's why I understand and acknowledge that I am no better than anyone else. I could very much still been doing whatever it was. It was almost like, yes, the stars aligned, you know, for all of those things to actually kind of, hit home.
I think what I find interesting is that in your story, there's a lot of exceptional individuals. So you have Pastor Mimi. She's still doing stuff with young people, innit, even now in Bristol.
Absolutely.
And it's like exceptional individuals that kind of, and I suppose maybe that's part of the reason why, although there's ingredients that you're talking about, there's love, there's compassion, there's space, there's questions and criticality. One of the ingredients that I think is maybe missing, and I want to get through some of the audience questions first, but it seems that one of the things that a lot of this depends on is having those exceptional individuals in your life at that right time. And maybe Absolutely. That's the difference between the young people that are able to find those transitions away from lifestyle. And
that's why time and chance is so heavy, you know, and that is why ultimately, like, I understand that I have in some ways the veritable lottery ticket win, you know, like I'm not under any kind of disillusion on that, you know, even though, yes, they're like, oh yeah, someone would hear it and see, oh no, but he's very capable. But I mean, there's so many people more capable than me on the streets still, you know, so yeah.
That's one thing about Brixton. It's Brixton, two things. Me and Carl spoke about this very briefly at the beginning. And it's one is that, number one, a lot of these guys start out as good people, or even underneath, you know, this mask that Carl's been talking about. They're good people, you know. Yeah. And the second thing is there's a lot of talent. A lot.
Absolutely.
A lot of talent.
It's a huge pool. It's a huge pool. I call them the hidden alumni. I mean, it's a huge pool, honestly. I mean, I've met, like, I am friends with a lot of captains of commerce, whether that be from the people that make our phones, Apple, Google, I mean, you name it, like presidents of Colombia, XY, Prime Minister of Bhutan. I mean, a lot of kind of high kind of performing individuals. And I know that I have seen their kin in a different environment in my community. I have met men and women and people just more capable coming from marginalized communities, and they have developed certain muscles that others haven't even needed to know exist, you know, because of the situation. So yeah.
I've got a question here from Chelsea, and she's asked, would you say your faith helped you in your transition from gang member to ex-gang member? Do you think your faith-based program could help deter young men and women from a life of crime? That's Chelsea's question.
I mean, when we are talking about a broken society, when we are talking about a lack of resources, a lack of everything, essentially, like, faith is definitely an asset. You know, so there wasn't really much going on that I could, in my grasp, or, you know, in my surroundings, that could encourage me. You know, it was definitely a faith flow. You know, I had to operate with vision and to move forward. And as I said, Pastor Mimi and her philosophy is definitely one that I took on wholeheartedly. You know, so I definitely feel as if there is a faith approach to dealing with what's going on the street level. And I know there's many kind of faith groups doing that, whether it be Christian, Muslim, or whatnot, you know, so I know that is happening. But I definitely feel as if when you are coming from communities where nothing is actually going on, you know, faith helps things get on, you know. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. So there's a question that kind of relates to our earlier conversation here, and it's, I'm sorry I don't have the person's name, so I'm so sorry. But thank you for your question. It says, what do you think helped you find a balance between the transitions between both lifestyles? Like, so how at that time were you sort of finding balance in your life, and what kind of things were you doing, I suppose?
And when we say balance, like, how do you mean? Oh, sorry, it's their question.
That's the problem with online stuff, isn't it? They can't always explain. Yeah. But I suppose balance within yourself. I suppose balance between, because one thing that I will say about, because the man them still call you Locks, isn't it, in Brixton?
Yeah.
But the man them, so we kind of have some shared social network, and they still talk to me about Locks. They're like, Locks is doing this stuff, and you should see what Locks is doing. And like, but they still have a lot of affection for you, innit? And I suppose, how do you get that balance? Because I think a lot of people, it's a bit of a zero-sum game, that if you come out of this, you lose the respect there. And if you, do you know what I mean? So maybe it's balance also. And how do you keep that affection and love and trust in both spaces? It's not easy. I know that as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you totally. I mean, the balance, to put it out there, is definitely not easy. And sometimes I lose that balance, so it's not like I'm always towing the line correctly and giving both kind of groups and communities everything they need. One time it might be a season where I'm kind of more focused here, and a season where I'm more focused there. A season where I'm like, yeah, these are my people, and a season where I'm like, no, these are my people, So, I mean, in regards to finding my own balance, I thought I had it till I got an identity crisis. Then I realized I don't think I had done it as well. But through the crisis, actually created a new kind of idea that I now hold, that what I have a home with a very big garden, essentially. So everything is kind of what it is. And in terms of having both sides kind of understand me, see me, and accept me, love does that. If you just show, the one thing about me is that, and I know about human beings, is that human beings are they're quite acute when it comes to reading things. Like, I see even with my 2-year-old son now, he can't speak and like have a full-on conversation, but he's learned to read every kind of bit with the countenance, the tones of voices, the time of day, and we've all gone through that process of having to look, observe, and read. So I feel like just being genuine just has helped me. It's been my biggest asset. I just let them know that, even when I left the streets, I apologized to all my friends. I had meetings with everybody. That was a sort of due diligence. I said, listen, I understand that some of you are even outside or involved in this because of my kind of contribution, so I don't want to disrespect you or what has been, but I currently no longer believe in it. So my mom begged me to stop. The police told me they were on me, told me to stop. Our enemies would have wanted us to stop, but I never stopped for any of them. But I don't believe it, so I can't do it. So I am sorry and I love you, but you know what? It is what it is. And I just kind of explain to different groups what it is. I've had similar conversations uptown as well, where I'm like, listen, I think we need a break because, this is a bit I'm going back, so I feel like just kind of being open and just loving everyone. I just love on everyone.
It sounds like there's a lot there, man. Like openness to change, love and compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
And accepting that, I think that one of the things is we need to feel like we know who we are all the time. But sometimes we're going through transition and change and we don't always know. And also probably there's a lot of, I keep kind of bringing this back to academic ideas, but there's a British Caribbean sociologist, and he talked about the idea of new ethnicities. And that through our pathways to Britain and through our pathways in Britain and the cultures that we share and the places that we go, we become new ethnicities with something. I'm not North African in the same way my family or my dad is North African, but there's something in me that's North African, something in me that's new.
Yes.
Because I've interacted with these people around me. And I suppose that's about being open to the newness and celebrating that newness is a big part of what's made you so successful. Is my observation anyway.
I know, I would say you're spot on, my man. Absolutely. I do have and it comes with pioneer pain. Because it is it is new. It's almost like a guinea pig sort of thing. So yeah, but it's worth it. I gotta be honest, having such a eclectic and kind of far pole. I don't like the word opposing, but having such kind of polarity in my associations and things that has enriched life for me in ways that I can't even articulate. So yeah, I'm very grateful for it.
I'm just asking the admin if we have time for another question. I don't know. How do you feel? We got 3 minutes left. Gonna do one more question.
Yeah, we can do it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So one question I think is quite interesting. So do you feel and again, I'm so sorry I haven't got the name here of the person that asked this question. But do you feel society or social pressures outweigh the initial foundation? So, as you said, in your parents were model citizens, yet you felt you needed to survive. And I suppose you talked a bit about actually in your talk about that you know they blame the family. Oh, it's the single parents. It's this, it's that, and rare. But how do you think that really weighs out in real life, like the social factors versus like how much your parents can actually do for you or what the families are doing for their children?
You know what? I think it's a bit too, like, to place it, it's the tipping point, right? So one has a different point at which they will tip, you know, and it also depends on how much social pressure there is, you know. So, for example, me seeing my friend's dad being murdered, and thinking that that could very easily and might be my father any day from now, that for me was a sufficient tipping point, you know. But even when I tipped, it didn't undo everything that had been done, you know, in terms of my foundation, you know. And I've realized that a lot of what my parents gave me is still an asset for me today, you know. But I mean, distraction of kind of living another way obviously took from its kind of power because I weren't able to walk in it fluidly. However, to answer the question, foundations are important. I have seen it keep individuals where I would have assumed that would be a tipping point, you know, and it did not tip them. I've seen some where they had not even great foundations and the social pressures in the area didn't even tip them into, you know, into it, you know. So I mean, it's not a science, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one thing that's interesting about your story as well, is that if you survive long enough, life is long, and throughout the life course, lessons that we learn early on can become valuable to us later, and vice versa. You know, like, well, I mean, they can never retrospectively be valuable, but they can be valuable to us later. So maybe that foundation at that moment where everything was going on, perhaps that can be tipped, right? But then later on, when you refine that balance that I think someone else was talking about, those lessons, they can come back again and come into play in your life. And I suppose that's a really good time to wrap it up. And I want to really thank you so much for being so candid and honest and generous in sharing your story with us. And I'm sure it looks like the comments just towards the end started really popping off. So it looked like it really reached the people in the audience, innit? So also thank you to those people in the audience, and thank you to those people that listened in and submitted questions. And, you know, I feel like this is a really good way to kick off the month and a really good way to share different kinds of perspectives, you know, Black perspectives during Black History Month, because I think we need that multiplicity of narratives or multiplicity of stories, because the Black experience is one experience. You know, it's multiple experiences. So yeah, thank you so much. And if you've got any final words, you want to say in the audience. Cool, man.
I mean, for me, like, I think the main thing is we go from contention and conflict to coexisting to collaboration, and the pinnacle that we need to get to is co-creation, you know. So I mean, I feel like we are going on a journey as a planet at the moment, and even though it might have more of the other themes, we have to keep in mind that, you know, there is a trajectory and we need to get there. It might be painful, you know. However, I mean, pioneer pain is a thing, you know. We need it for the new. So yeah,
pioneer pain is a good phrase. Still. All right, wicked, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice one.
Oh, bro, thank you.